Some of y'all have been around, or at least have had a driver's license long enough that the rules are a little different. I think I remember Mom saying she drove herself to the courthouse to get her driver's license, which seems very contradictory to the rules. And when I was in school, actually, I was actually 14. She only had like 30 days. But somewhere between 14 and 3 years old and me, we had like 6 months. I mean, that's the college. Well, now it's still a 6-month thing, but you have to have a form signed by the school saying that you are passing or doing things like that. So we went up all the way to Jackson, went to the school, I called my boss, and I said, yeah, I need this. And he signed the form, he's reaching her. And he said, we're going to drive back from Jackson. He said, I think if you drive 52 back from Jackson all the way to Lexington, they go ahead and give you the license right then and there. But anyway, we still fine yesterday and prepared. The good bit of that time, practicing the school parking lot, learned all the ins and outs. Didn't work for his brother, the Mexican restaurant down on so it was, that's what she wanted to do more than anything. So, I got a question for you to start with tonight. What do people notice first when they enter your house? Think for a second. What do they notice first when they enter your house? So I asked the question, I want you to think about it for a second. For most of us, I guess we're really for that anybody, probably should, but it puts it on the apartment, because it's a house, there's probably multiple doors that go into it. And it depends on which door the people come into. I would say this, you come into the front door of my house, you'll see a couch, and chairs, a TV, and a room that looks very nice. If you go in the garage door, you'll see laundry room with piles of laundry in the process of being cleaned. Don't depend on which door you're going into, right? But I have a problem to bring people in with one door rather than the other door, right? But people will notice things, and you may notice that the first thing as well. I would dare say, and I asked you this, Lucille said something that I've never noticed at all, but you may notice, and the person that comes in may not, and vice versa. There may be something that's been sitting in your room or your living room or whatever that you never even paid attention to, but the minute I walk in, that's the first thing that you would know. Let me ask you everybody. If someone spent 1 week in your house, what would they conclude matters most to you and your family? If they spent a week in your house, what would they conclude that matters most to you? Well, maybe not what week is, right? You said the summer week of dating is a whole lot different than if you spend a week in the spring where we have gospel meeting and dinner all at the same time. Which is the difference for it, but if someone spent a week in your house, what would they conclude matters? So all of these, even what time do you go visit? Right? If you only go visit somebody one night and they stay up late, but if you're there for a week, you'll get to know all this. So the longer we're there, the more familiar, I guess, we'll be with it, for good or bad. And I would dare say that most of us, not exactly what it is, but most of us might not like the answer of what somebody would say after a week to that question. Because that is a pretty straightforward description of it, right? I can fake it to a make it for one night, right? I can, if somebody's going to come over and visit, we're going to clean everything as good as we can. Right? This is what it always looks like. You have to look right now, right? But if you're there the whole time, it's all good. Tonight, doorpost is something that the Bible uses several times. And this is not a biblical house, I just saw the picture of it. We're often used as symbols of protection, right? This is sort of the stopping point in danger, perhaps. In the Bible, they were used as identity. In reality, we may do the same thing. Some of them may have a flag hanging by your door. You may have a wreath hanging on your door. Some of you may have a little plaque or a number with your name in your street hanging on the door. It's a sense of identity that's there. The Bible uses doorposts as a way of teaching. We'll talk about that this evening as well as some things. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 9. The children of Israel were told to write the commandments on the doorposts of their house. Now, I doubt many of you are going to go home tonight and get out a Sharpie and write on your wall, around your doorpost. But you live in a house or a culture that's a little different than that. But that's how they were told, because if you were to write something on your doorpost, every time you walk in or out, you would notice it, right? I guarantee you, if I went to Boo's house tonight and wrote on her wall, she would notice it. It would kill me, but she would notice it, right? You would ask, but the point of that is to notice it, right? If I go to Boo's house, I find the 18 foot on the shelf, and I go to page 283 and write my name at the bottom of it, I don't notice that, right? But on the doorpost, it's there. They were told in Deuteronomy to write the commandments on the doorpost of the house. It was not a decoration. The flag's a decoration. The wreath is a decoration. Truthfully, the flag that has your name and the street number on it is a decoration. This was not a decoration, but rather it was central. It was important for keeping God central to their life. This is our fourth lesson. And we're taking it from Exodus chapter 12, verses 21 through 28. I had to read the first part because I thought it was just going to be too much reading for one. And so we read Exodus 12, verses 1 through 14, and now we're going to jump down to verses 21 through 28. Then you can read Exodus 12, 21 to 28.
Everyone was called for the elders of Israel and said, "Take out the tank for yourselves, fight for yourselves, according to your families, to kill the Passover lamb. You should take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike it to the left and to the doorpost with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of this house, for the Lord will pass through and strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the mantle and on the doorpost, the Lord will pass over the doorpost, and not allow the destroyer to come into your house and strike you. And you shall observe these things as an ordinance, for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep his service. And it shall be when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? That you shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord. To pass over the house of the children of Israel in Egypt, which struck the Egyptians in the middle of the house. So the people bowed their heads and worshiped. The children of Israel went away and did so. And they so just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron.
All right. So the first verses 1 through 14, talk about the Passover feast, right? It gives some descriptions about what would be ate, how you would prepare it. And the point being is that you were going to be kind of, the way you would start to grab a sandwich to go out the door almost, right? They would be prepared for that. And they would still celebrate that. And then this, the second part, talks about what's going to happen. And they were told in a government town sense, to put blood on the door, right? In the Passover, and for the Passover, and it would be, it would slip out there as it were. And so they've endured this bondage in Egypt for a long time. And we talked about I've been talking about before, but the plagues in Egypt and all this. But God announces this final plague, and the deliverance of actually the Israelites, but the Israelites would be necessary, and that deliverance required obedience. Okay? And so they were going to be delivered, but they had to do their part. There was a strict obedience. And that was, the Lord said, if blood was applied to the doorpost, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. Now, we don't celebrate Passover, because Passover is a Jewish holiday. But we have Passover tends to fall roughly a celebration essentially of a sparing of the Jewish people. The teaching was so held that had these people not been spared, there would have been no Jewish population that would exist. So that was the rule that was there. And that blood represented a few things. As we mentioned earlier, it represented protection. Because I put the blood on my door, but Tom didn't, so my house is protected from Tom's as it represented obedience. I obeyed what was required, Tom didn't in this example. It represented faith, right? In faith, the Bible says it's the substance of things hoped for, right? The evidence of things not seen. And it maybe seems dumb how to take blood and put it on, like if you did that, that doesn't make sense. But there was a bit of faith that was required in that, as well as a representation of deliverance. So you get all of those things sort of tied right here. But the important one is there's God. God can simply reward their belief, but Israel had to act in obedient faith as well. Thoughts before we go further. We got some questions, but if you got anything you want to say before we go further.
There's a bunch of people I promise you that we call our heart.
Yeah. So we're going to ask that question here in just a second. We'll talk about that. There's one. But always to consider, this is sort of the story here as it goes. Now, this gets referenced a few times as well. In the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 28. Can you compare to read Hebrews 11 and 28? So this is the Hebrew line in chapter 11 talking about the things that what had been done. It said he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, and as Leland said here, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch it. And so there's a destruction of the firstborn that's going to happen if they don't do what was required of them. Now, we talked about how faith is necessary. It's a somewhat challenging thought. There's probably nothing that's related to it, but James talks a bit about that as well. James chapter 2, verses 17 to 26. Who do you read? So here is to reiterate sort of the role of faith. And we said that they had to sprinkle blood on the doorpost, right? And so that was an odd request. But the James talks about a couple other things as well. But go back, it says, was Abraham not justified by works when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? But think about that for a second. What was Abraham told to do? Offer his only son, right? Go up on the mountain and offer his only son. And if you ever think about that, if we're just thinking about that in sort of your brain, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? If you said to offer a lamb, well, I might have 100 of those. If you said to offer, some of my clothes or some of my shoes, but offer my son, without a whole lot of instruction to go along with it, right? It wasn't like, well, you go up there, and this will happen, and this will happen, and then this hit. He really went blind, right? He just went up there. And the question know, if you're Isaac, probably a lot of faith on his life. But these are examples that were given. Talks about Rahab the harlot who came into the store, and what was she supposed to do so her house would stay? Ribbon, right? Like a cord that would hang down. Well, I don't know that I would have left my house because there's a war going on. I might would if it was getting a little close, but I definitely don't, hanging on. What's a red cord hanging down going to do? Like that? That's just something. But all of these are examples of things, right? They're not necessarily anything special. It was just, okay, this is what I've been told. This is what I'm going to do. It may not make sense to me, but this is what I'm going to do. Do we have things like that in our lives today? Let's go one more. John chapter 14.
I'm just thinking that if God had not made it awful, put the blood on the door, the people could have said, well, I'm going with it. Prove that we're going to keep out the blood. They could have worked 9 days with the blood on the door, worked to the arm set off on the bank, and it would not have saved a single solitary son. But God told them to do it, and they did it. That's like ritual.
John chapter 14, verse 15. Bill? Simple, right? It's a pretty sure, but this is a really good verse to tie into Rahab, to tie into Abraham and Isaac, to tie into the children of Israel and Egypt, because they are being asked to keep the commandments, and there's a lot of faith and there's a lot of love that goes into it. Now, the context is going to go to that. Something about why is obedience essential in this Passover story?
God gives a painful death of a man. He was thankful that happened, and that broke her covenant. How do you covenant this to do this blood?
So it was this covenant, this agreement that this past that would need to be done until Passover. Now, was it an odd request, at least in our mind? But was it a hard request? No. How do you think the people would have had access to blood to be able to do something like this? It might be harder for us today to do it, right? Because how many of you have animals at home, right? Not many of us, right? We don't have a lot. And so what we might have to do, we might have to, this would be a bigger challenge perhaps for us. But the point here was for these people, it was not an undoable task. It may have been an odd task. Well, we can probably relate to that with all of what we said. Let's go to the second one. What would have happened had an Israelite had said, I believe God, but blood's gross, and my door looks nice, and I'm not putting blood on my door, or fill in the blank with whatever reason it could have been. What would have happened had they said that?
There are a lot of people who did do it because they were afraid what the Egyptians wanted. What would the Egyptians do to them?
Today?
And I say, no, they did. Now, I believe God. I still want to
Right. So, I guess we can kind of make the sword find out what happened. But I think that was the other back to it right there, that we sometimes, we kind of walk around and sit around on her door, because we have a week to say, but is she doing it? We kind of want to look and see what others are doing as well. Show them hard.
I'm saying, we can criticize any time about these people, these people, trying to do exactly what they thought else to do. But these people here, if they're outside of the house, they don't know what they want to do. When they're down in the local tavern or hanging out at people's house, that's why I think we have to do this is what God said to do. You don't do it. You basically can't say that whole time.
Right. So all of them sort of a pile of things together, but it's easy to skip over one and then not do everything else. Any other thoughts on those before we go further?
One other thought, God allowed people to make this You don't have to put the blood on the door. You don't take that. It's exactly like you don't have to baptize. You don't have to. You don't have to.
So, this is Deuteronomy chapter 6. Verses 1 through 9. I'm prepared to read this a little longer.
Now, this is the commandment. These are the statutes because the Lord your God has commanded you. That you may observe them in the land which you are called over to possess. That you may fear the Lord your God. Keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you, your sons and your grandchildren, all the days of your life. And that your days may be prolonged. Therefore, be careful to observe, that it may be well with you, that you may multiply greatly as the Lord God your fathers has promised, the land of the Lord which you are to possess. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. When you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up, you shall bind them as a sign in your head. They shall be a frontlet within your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house on your gate.
So we're going to jump forward a little bit, but you'll remember we just said that they have to put this blood on the It's the now gone that they moved out. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, they're about to go into the promised land, right? They took the law out, they sort of wandered here and there, to and fro, with some success and a lot of troubles along the way. But they're about to go in, and they're told that what they need to do. These 9 verses would say, and essentially, it picks right up where Exodus chapter 12 left off. Exodus chapter 12 said that when you leave, you're going to think about this. And what Deuteronomy chapter 6 is saying is the same thing. Is that you need to remember what you're coming through, right? You need to remember things that you have come out of. And it says here in the last thing, you're going to write these commandments on the doorpost of your house and on your bed. And every time you walk through that doorpost, you're going to see what? Those commandments. And those commandments being written on the doorpost are going to remind you of what? Of your ancestors. They did what God had asked them on their doorpost. Had they not, would you be right where you are? So there's a connection here between the two. Now, we don't write on the doorpost, but I would imagine that you have things in your house that remind you of things that passed away, right? All of us probably do. It could be pictures, it could be something hanging on, it could be some kind of memento or something like that. But the reason that you have that is it reminds you of something. And it may be something that was very positive. It could be something very negative. It could be something in between or whatever. But the point of that is to remember it when you see it. And that's what they're being told to do right now. So they're going into this, and God warns them that prosperity can lead to forgiveness. Is that still true today? How does prosperity lead us to forgiveness? You're a little proud because you look at all these things that I have done, right?
The more you have, the more you tend to lean on those things instead of leaning on God.
And we can all probably relate to these kind of things. And we see here that in this writing, there's a progression that they talk about. Verses 4 and 5, loving God completely. But not just loving God completely, verses 4 and 5, and then verses 6 and 7, teaching God's word diligently. So not like, well, I love God, but I'm not going to worry about other people, or these people are in my house, or my children, or whatever. And then all the way here to writing them on the doorpost. So if we make this connection, I love God. I'm going to teach people that live in my house and people that come in my house why, and I'm going to write it on the doorpost so me and them, neither one, will be able to forget. Now again, we don't write on the doorpost, but do we think about transition things the same way? Or if we sort of, as Paul said, hide it under the bushel, right? But sometimes do. All of these focused on 3 things: study, visibility, and remembrance. As a Christian, should you study? All the time. And study, it means different things. It doesn't mean you guys get to know the book and read for 5 hours a day. That's all it means. But there should be study going on at all times. But not just study. Should your faith be visible? Should you remember things from the past? Do you ever think about, I'm going to use the word former Christians, but Christians who are deceased? Y'all ever think about people that you know who are deceased? Why? And that? Good memories, right? Positive memory. Something that adds to the impact. Maybe something to strive for, right? That person said 2 years in front of me every single time the door was open, and I would be just like that, or whatever the case. The things that we're talking about here. In faith, this idea of faith, I know this may seem weird, it says faith comes from hearing, but hearing is teaching, right? And so faith, we have to teach faith. It has to be daily, it has to be natural, it has to be constant. And religion, the last thing here, religion without love, now do this, now do this, now do this. Those kind of things. Let's go. Proverbs 22, verse 6. What's it for you? We probably all seen this verse at some point, right? These are teaching verses. Jimmy, Psalm 78, what day, sir?
In here on my feet, with my law, my ears, the word with my mouth, I will open my mouth in purpose. I will utter dark things with old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. It will not hide them from their children. The praise of the Lord, and his wonderful works he has done. So we have had protection from the game. Word of all his children, he made our fathers, that they should not have them. That was for children, that generation shall not know them. Children who be born, that they may inspire them to their children, that they may get their hold of God, and not forget the works of God, that he has made, not be like fathers, but that is the generation, that is the not.
If you have your Bible open right now, we're probably in Exodus, Deuteronomy, where we were. If you were to flip on over to the middle of the Bible, with me in Psalms, you just draw it, split it right down the middle. In Psalm 78, is teaching the exact same thing that Exodus taught and that Deuteronomy taught. Maybe it's not teaching, maybe it's reminding, right? It's reminding that they should be made out. They should teach these things from the past. And you're not saying, well, that was forever ago, 100 years, 1,000 years ago, doesn't really matter now. We're saying you need to continue to teach. Let's step forward to the New Testament. St. James chapter 1, verses 3 to 5. Paul writing here to Timothy, he said, I serve a pure conscience as my forefathers did. Okay, so he's saying people earlier had served him, his forefathers. It's not just his parents, but what he means here is the people that are in that Old Testament. This is the Exodus, this is the Deuteronomy, this is Psalm. So he says to Timothy, he said, I am remembering your grandmother and your mother. And why was he remembering Timothy's grandmother and mother? What did they do? They had taught him. Well, they had done what it said to do in Deuteronomy, right? What it said to do in Exodus, what it said to do in Psalm. They had done the exact same thing. So I have a question. Why is transition of things difficult?
Everybody do.
Everybody do. Well, I've used a specific word here. I hope that that's explained.
I've always said, if you as a child, I did, I kept it, but that's true, because it's really good attention to a lot of these things, and that can't, but family is different than just was raised in San Antonio, just as that was what it takes to get rich, what it takes to make you rich, to make you happy. So it's hard to do, and also we have a hard time walking out. I heard the great analogy today was talking about believing what it means. It says, imagine you're a hitchhiker, somebody pulls over and says, jump in. You just put your backpack on. It's like, throw your backpack. No, you're carrying me that, I'm going to take care of the backpack. Well, the same truck's carrying over. It's the same way with us. God, we trust God with our salvation. It was like, we're not really going to trust you with our facts. Right. Trust you will get me to heaven, and I'm not going to trust you to get me to 65. And so it makes it hard for us to transmit because we have a hard time letting go of it.
We use the word transition for a reason. Transition, we need to move it from one another. That's not the way that they work, right? The Bible, we read Proverbs 14, verse 6, is train the child in the way they should go. Never the word children in the way that they will, right? They should. All I can do is tell you what you should do, right? But as that's at the beginning, it's still up to the person on the way there. I can put the truck and drive, but I hope the transition gets it there, right? Sometimes it may not. It's the same question. Transmission of faith, or even instilling faith, is sometimes difficult because it's not always in first place. What competes for first place in our lives today? Yes, us. Okay, that's everything, right? Literally everything competes for first place. Every single thing. And anytime if it's a competition, what you're going to get gold. You don't get gold, you'll get the silver. The person who wins the silver might be proud, but they always know that somebody was a little bit better than somebody got more. Well, today we have that same issue. So I think the third question for us to talk about more is that this says children and grandchildren, but I think this is even important to you today. How do we build habits, or what spiritual habits can we build that will help strengthen our faith rather than weaken it? So Deuteronomy chapter 6. Second
Number one, you're probably your children are one of the horrible things about every baby like I did with Jesse was when I just had it in there for a week. She got that not feeling well, which they don't. That was a horrible feeling. I just said no. We want to feel back here, we want to feel back here, we want to feel back here. And you said that and he told you that no matter what you see, that this is most important, more important than you would get everything.
The word habit here is important, right? What is a habit? Repetitive action, right? How many of you have habits in your life? How many of you have things that are not habits? Well, that's one. Judy and I, we need to not habits for us, right? You know, we go out there and do it every now and then, but I don't make a habit of it. Judy and I can avoid it. Well, there are things that maybe we choose to be. Most habits are habits because we have life. You have want to do it that way. We sort of choose to be that way. And faith is the same thing. Going to church is never two different things. As a habit that you all have chosen to put the importance on in your life. Now, this decision is not good. It's a choice. If you go back to Joshua, it's a verse you're familiar with, but what is it? Do you care to read your glasses? Well, I tell you, it's hard time to go. We won't ever read the book. Joshua 24, 14, and 15. We won't make it. You want it? Okay. I got you. So now I want you to read it.
Now therefore, fear the Lord, serve him with sincerity and with truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river, and yet eat. Serve the Lord, and if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites, which were you dwell. But as for me and
skip ahead a little bit from what we originally read, but we go right back here to Egypt, when Joshua says, and he said, put away the gods which your fathers started on the other side of the river in Egypt. What he's saying is there were people, there were Israelites that went to Egypt and just kind of fell in with the Egyptians. They just kind of went ahead and did that. But he told me, he said, choose this day whom you will serve. And there's an important one we mentioned at the beginning. There's a choice there, right? We can choose to help transmit faith, or we do not. That's a choice, right? I can choose a habit of attending church and doing things like that. And the choice was always there, and the choice continues to exist even today. Every home, every family, every person chooses something. Every person serves something. Success, comfort, recreation. There are people that I know that whatever the measure of success, that's the only thing there is. And anything else has to be shoved aside. Well, we all make those kind of choices. But Joshua intentionally placed spirituality first. He said, choose you this day whom you will serve. He says, for me, and who? And my house, we will what? We will serve the Lord. So he was going to do it in his house. These are people that live under him. He said, you live in my house, my rules, right? You live under my house, this is what we're going to do. Now, you go live over there somewhere, you make a choice. That's your choice. But we're under here. Why is spiritual leadership what Joshua is doing here? Why? They work. First question, second question, how do they go together? So if you look at the second question, how can Christians influence their families without becoming overbearing? Example.
I had a young man say one time, they were really overbearing. And it's always about Christianity. It's God's person. And I just do this testimony because they were always taught.
Yeah.
You can be a Christian without it. And they'll get sometimes. And that came to happen.
I mean, you have anybody in your life that you wish was at church tonight that are not? So what if we, about 7:30, and we call and just remind them for the next 30 minutes about you? They'll be here next year, right? Why all that not work? So there's a lot. Do we need that? Invite them to church. Is there maybe a time when we might need for us a little bit? But sometimes we need to be what? We need an adopted person, right? Here's what we started. Here's what we're doing. We have cookies that, something like that, right? But you become overbearing if you just eat it down over and over again. God said, in my house, we choose to serve the Lord. You have to make it. And God just said everything. You can present the option, right? People, you lead a horse of water, what's the same, right? What? It ain't true, right? Go over. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that they may dwell with you, and you may live long on the earth. And your fathers, and you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up into training and admonition of the Lord. And that's the point right there. I think that is making a difference. That sometimes we can beat it so much that we're almost encouraging rebellion. That we're almost encouraging wrath. Well, if you're out of the church, then I absolutely got it. Right? Whatever, and I can go 180 degrees in the opposite direction, perhaps, if we desire like we may. Parents are instructed to bring up their children in this on the nurture, the teaching, and admonition of the Lord. So a Christian home requires respect, instruction, patience, and prayer. Now I want you to think about those four things. Which one of those is the heart? respect, instruction, patience, and grace. Probably patience, right? Why is respect maybe not the hardest? And it just makes a different answer for different people.
Because if you're a Christian, you've already conquered that, or you should have. You're going to put others above you. They need to be, but they overload the children so much. And they need to understand, if you don't understand how beat you or not, you have to know that daddy and mom and them know sometimes I get wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong. But we're always I'm wrong. And okay, so they apologize for this. I was wrong. I did not mean to do that. But a lot of people can't do it because they think it's short truth. And if you go the other way, too much sin, maybe you got with her and you're not going to it's a fine line to run the
So all of these days, instruction is important, and training from that patience that's a difficulty, right? Patience is a challenge for all. But if you read there at the last, it says those are the same things that God shares with us. Do we always show God the appropriate respect? Probably not. Right? But do we always listen to the instruction of God? Not at all. Do we ever try God's patience? I would venture to say we probably do. Right? Do we ever take God's training and just sort of push it aside? I'm not going to do that. So those same requirements are there. Colossians 3:20 and 21. Aren't you good?
Children, later parents, and all things, will please the Lord, calling to not neglect your children.
Said right there. And this question we've already talked about, but common mistakes in spiritual leadership at home. We mentioned that, right? Maybe you're too demanding. Maybe we're not demanding enough, right? Maybe we don't have patience. What are some other mistakes in spiritual leadership at home? It could be real life examples that you experience, but it could be hard as well.
the daddy might be interested in his own spirituality, but not really studying his Bible. You know, I can all I'm studying Bible, and I know by myself. And I'm not presenting to my children, so do I. Well, sometimes we have to learn
Sure. When we drive in the parking lot over there, we'll turn in and I said, oh, we go fire, and kind of throw up over there. And I didn't even realize that. I'm like, there's time before we don't do that. I didn't realize that. But you kind of balance, right? I mean, if we don't turn in right, we drag on the side of this board that's one here beside us, it's going to be bad too, right? But that's a challenge. That's a leadership challenge, right? All of we can find all kinds of mistakes like that. And that's the challenge that we have. But when we're talking about putting blood on the doorpost, the whole point of this teaching, right? And so we see it repeated, we see it over and over again. And all of these verses that we look at, all the reasons are scripture, right? About teaching and learning. The teaching doesn't ever stop. My parents still teach it, right? Now, they teach a little different than they did when I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old, but they still teach. And we said this is your parents that are still teach you. Because the instruction is continuing. Look up here to finish up. God never intended for our faith to stay within these 4 walls. It's easy to just sort of drop the faith off, you know, with the song book after it's over. We'll get back to this on Sunday. That's not what we teach. It was in the home. It was in our routines. It was in our conversation. It was in our priorities. And so, like we said at the beginning, we're not writing on the doorposts necessarily anymore, but we're not doing it the way that they would have done it. But our priorities might have missed everything. And the question I asked at the beginning is if somebody came and spent a week with you, would they see your Christian soul grow? Well, if they could, it's not. If they can't, that can be fixed. But I would dare say that most of us probably fall somewhere in the middle. There's some times when it's visible, and there's some times when it's not. So I'll ask as we go forward, what are some things you think about? What are some things that you could write on your doorposts this week that would make your faith a little more visible? Is there anything we can do now, whatever it is, in life to come on?
Jesus loves me, this I know.